think 2 weeks ago we were all heartened by the statement that President Johnson made and his initiatives that were taken toward preliminary talks for peace. Yet despite our pledge made again and again over the period of the last several years that we could go anywhere at any time to seek a negotiated end to the war, these preliminary talks, much less the genuine negotiations, have yet to begin. I think they should begin. We made our position clear a year ago. We made our position clear 2 years ago, that we'd go anytime, any place. We didn't say we'd go anytime, any place to any place but Phnom Penh, or we'd go any place but Warsaw. We said we'd go any place. Going to have buttons to distribute to all of you. But recognize what your own position is. Those of you who voted for a deferment for college students. If it affects you personally, it's one thing. If it affects you personally, it's one thing, but it happens to affect a lot of other people. And the fact is that these are conditions for, if you look in Vietnam, 10% of our population is Negro, and yet 20% of those who were killed and wounded in Vietnam are black people. You've got twice as much chance of being drafted if you're eligible, if you're a black person than if you're a white person in the United States. And the same, I think about a particular subject, and you can decide where I am. Well, I don't, you mean in various states? Oh, but I don't think he does yet, and I don't want to tell him right now. I want him to wait. Thank you very much. South Koreans were present, or the South Vietnamese were present. We said we wanted to talk about peace, and that we'd go any place and we would talk about peace. I think we should go and we should talk about peace and find a settlement to the war in South Vietnam. I think we have to remember, again, as we stay here, all of us, as you sit up there and I stand here, that there are young Americans being killed, and that there are South Vietnamese being killed, and that there are many women and children and innocent people being killed. And I think that is partially our responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of the United States government, it's the responsibility of the American people. And I think that we have to accept that responsibility. And last week, our combat deaths were the highest for any time in the previous 5 weeks. Once again, our combat deaths were greater among Americans than they were in the ranks of the South Vietnamese army. And I don't think, again, that this is acceptable. I think we can help them. I think we can help the South Vietnamese, but I don't think that we're over there to win the war for them or conduct the war for them, or that we should make this an American war. And I think that's what we've done over the period of the last several years, that we've made it an American war and not the war of the South Vietnamese for their own independence and freedom. I think it's been a gravest kind of error. And what the result is that the deaths and the destruction that has taken place has been largely our responsibility. The result is that the South Vietnamese army has let us, the United States, conduct the major part of the fighting. I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think it's acceptable that we should have the corruption and the dishonesty that exists in the South Vietnamese government. I don't think it's acceptable for the United States that a young soldier, a young boy in South Vietnam can easily buy his way out of the draft. I don't think it's acceptable in this country that we spend money for refugees and only $1 out of every $3 ever gets to the refugees. I think our policy should change. I think that the government of South Vietnam should broaden its political base and take in other groups within South Vietnam so that they are prepared to negotiate with our adversaries at the appropriate time. I think they should be prepared to do that. And I think that we should be sure that they move in that direction. I think any other policy, any other program followed by us is unacceptable. And I think it's causing great numbers of deaths amongst Americans, as well as the death and destruction in South Vietnam. And I think we also have to recognize that every day that this war goes on, every day that this war is prolonged, it's not just the deaths of Americans, but the fact that we spend $85 million a day, that it's about $30 billion a year, $500 or $600 million a week in the war in Vietnam. I would like to see that money spent here in the United States on the problems and difficulties that we're facing with our own people, to ensure that there are jobs for our young men and our young women, to ensure that there's an adequate educational system in all of the states, in all areas of the United States, and to ensure that we have decent housing for our fellow citizens, to ensure that the poor in this country have a decent opportunity, and to improve the quality of life of all of our citizens. I think that that's important. I think that's kind of a step of ending the war, of getting to the negotiating table, of finding a settlement with honor in that part of the world, and bringing that money back and spending it here in the United States on behalf of our own citizens and on behalf of the dispossessed around the rest of the globe. On behalf of those who so desperately need it within our own country and elsewhere. If you don't make the other, then I think we have a responsibility to change that system. The same thing, I don't think it's acceptable that most of the world diets while a great part of the United States, most of the world goes without. There's going to be a world in which children suffer and are tortured. But we can lessen when through no fault of their own, another child is born in Mississippi and is a different color and is slowly starving to death, and we won't do anything about it and do nothing to change it, for some more than others. I took a poll amongst them, and they're with me. And I think with them. And then I think we can develop programs. I told you what I would do as far as the cities, and I told you what I would do as far as Vietnam is concerned. I think we should go to the negotiation.